Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton at Big C Sports. Coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the number one network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the number one sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners. And Latin America, also across the pond, in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada. We love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful March the 4th, 2020, Rondo Deportes. Big C, how's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, we're enjoying a beautiful day. First and foremost, like to say thank you and God bless you to all the essential workers, the healthcare workers and first responders out there, Charlton, working so hard every day on the front line, trying to keep everybody safe and healthy from this COVID disease. But, you know, it seems like they've lifted so much of the social distancing out there, Charlton, it seems like we may have another wave coming.
Well, that's what some people are saying. We just have to keep our head in science. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars. Also, Big C Sports is powered by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic from 3,000 miles away, and he'll do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. But you got to have a smart TV or you'll just get a still picture. Really appreciate the way things are growing. Also, Big C, I love so much of the fact that we're doing our military hotline, but it really is for everybody now. Their experience in helping veterans and their loved ones. Why is that so important to you?
Well, Charlton, our National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, we've talked about it for some length of time, and it's a great public service that we can do every day that we're on the air. When we think about how many military veterans that we've lost every day to suicide in this country, an average of 19 a day, Charlton, but not only that, we lose so many young people to this horrific disease. Everyone in America always has a weakness, and we're always looking for someone to blame, but we need to look for somebody to lean on to find a way out of this tragic plight that we've had with the suicide in this country. So giving out the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, Charlton, it's not about having shame, it's about having dignity.
Yeah. Someone
to talk to bring that dignity back in your life, and we're doing our part that we can every day that we're on the air.
We are doing our part. 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you're online, simply go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and you can get some help. Even if it's not the person needing the help, you may know people who need that help. You can call that number, and they can definitely get someone who's experienced and give them help. Also, very happy to be affiliated with Valley Homes Weekly TV on Dish TV, DirecTV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants. Just tell them Big C sent you. The goal is simple: recruit 100 real estate brokers, put their property listings on TV, just like McDonald's does it. Car dealerships do it, and sports teams do it too. Watch real estate work for you. 800-772-8624, 800-772-8624. Ironically, with the way things are going in business, I was doing a mortgage training over the last week, and there's a major company in Northern California. Every year, they process about $1 billion in mortgage loans, and because rates are so low and they're expecting, thanks to a lot of people to refinance, they're expecting in the next 2 years $10 billion in mortgage loans. $10 billion, because there'll be more activity. And if you're paying over 4%, definitely need to call your bank and see if they can adjust that too. Big C, I know there's a lot of things going on in the world of sports, and I really appreciate how everybody is talking about, I mean, to me it doesn't really matter, but it matters to me the fact that we have Congress and we have the states that are open, and I think 42 of 50 states have some plans of reopening before Mother's Day. The Supreme Court justices, they're starting to conduct their work by teleconference. So they're doing teleconferences to keep themselves safe, but they're telling the general public, go ahead and go back to the good old days. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, all you have to do is have some semblance of intelligence, Charlton, and they'll tell you who's essential and not essential. If they're telling people to go out there every day in America, starting from the White House on down, and take your chances in the street, being next to other citizens, Charlton, unprotected. You know, go on outside your house, go to the beach, go to the grocery store, just hang out in the parks.
Yeah.
I mean, if we pay attention to the science about what's going on and have some semblance of intelligence, that you should seem to understand that social distancing has worked. But as everybody is itching to get out, I mean, and I understand being claustrophobic and not wanting to be in the house all the time and go out and smell the flowers.
Yeah.
But you also have to think about your overall health. Not think about a 2-month span, but think about a 2-year span. Do you want to get through the next 2 years or just survive another 2 months?
Yeah, it's amazing. They were having the U.S. National Mall and monuments were crowded over the weekend. They actually had the Blue Angels were flying above, and they were paying homage to our first responders. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Congress is not out at the celebration. They're doing teleconferencing now the same way a lot of people have been doing over the last month. You know, basically the last 2 months, it seems, Big C, when they started announcing the shutdown for a lot of people to be essential. But I know there's times when the land of the free, the home of the brave, it doesn't mean the land of the well-read and in the home of the scientifically led. Sometimes they're just in the 42 states to be open before Mother's Day weekend. And I don't know. I just don't understand how I want to get out and do things too. And everybody does. But why is Congress the ones saying that they don't want to get together, but they're asking our brethren to get together? To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Your thoughts?
Well, when people can protect themselves and shield themselves from the public, I don't know the last time that you saw Congress hanging out with the public, you know, socializing with the public. So they're always going to be behind closed, protected doors, Charlton. But as I look at all these people that are antsy to get out in the street, but they're the first to want to run to the hospital the minute they got to a fever, say, I need to be tested for COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The hospitals turned people down because they saw them on a news cycle just hanging out when they told them to socially distance themselves.
Yeah.
You know, think about how this country would be at that point.
Yeah, there's been over 68,000 fatalities. In fact, there were like 68,689 last time I saw some information on that. So I hope that people can pay attention to that too. It's like, you know, like it or not, politicians, they do matter. Unfortunately, you have Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He made it quite clear on Friday that he wants to use sports to convince people that everything is under control, which is not only crazy, it's premature and very dangerous. And again, if people can Google how Congress is teleconferencing now, okay? They're teleconferencing, and people like the great Mitch McConnell, it's amazing how he's telling people everything's great. Just give me my cell phone so I can call in the Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, it's been 7 weeks without live sports in America. And every news cycle that you look at, whether it's sports or the regular news, Charlton, they're always talking about sports getting back on the playing field. How do you practice social distancing with sports? How the league's going to bring the players back in and practice. And as, you know, Mitch McConnell and Congress is sitting there saying, okay, if we can get sports back on the playing field,
yeah,
then we can tell everybody that it's safe. If we have these athletes out there, and these athletes have the ability to be tested every day after every practice and prior to a practice, Charlton. So it's a lot different from the general public. And people say, well, athletes are privileged. No, money's privileged.
Yeah.
When you think about the type of money that these leagues possess, they can buy the tests that they want to have, and they can test all of their personnel as frequently and as often as they want to.
Yeah.
But that's not the general public. I know people are dying, and no pun intended, to get back in the stands to see sporting events.
Yeah.
As we look at the states that are opening back up, mainly southern states first, Charlton, and, you know, they're talking about trying to get college football back on the slate. And I understand how big a revenue game that college football is, but you got to start with the youth football first. Look at Pop Warner football. Look at high school football. You can't say that those teams, Charlton, have the money to do the testing that the professional leagues does, or even the college teams. So how are you going to protect the Pop Warner players? We already saw where Little League Baseball has been canceled this year for the first time since World War II.
Yeah.
What about Pop Warner football? And I believe that came into play around 1969, 1970 in America. And we think about the beginning of football, high school football, that's been around for an eternity.
Yep.
How are you going to protect those kids? And we know a lot of these high schools in rural areas, Charlton, they don't have funding. And think about the 8-man football they play because you don't have enough attendance in the school to fill the 11-man team. So when we talk about putting all these youth sports in peril, I understand the need and the want for college football, but if college football is played, then high school football is going to be played. And you think about the number of high school football teams, Charlton, compared to the number of college football teams.
Goodness.
We're talking about thousands of high school football teams that are going to be out there without proper testing.
Yeah, I mean, we just got to look at the numbers, too. I want to make sure that people know the numbers, no matter what Congress is doing what Big C Sports has been doing 5 years. They're communicating, or the communication now by telephone. They're not sitting 2 feet and 3 feet apart anymore. Well, the TV stations that want to broadcast these games, they're still on the phone like Big C Sports started doing 5 years ago. It's all fair and love and war. But what you need to know, there's more than 1.1 million cases and over 68,800 COVID-19 related fatalities in the United States alone that have been recorded. Supreme Court justices, they're conducting their business via teleconference. Restaurants and retail spaces in Florida are allowed to reopen today. Some in 42 states will be doing the same thing. Scientists are they're working as part of the White House task force to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus to be, honed in on 14 different vaccines to test and develop. But it's just amazing. I think there's a program that told me about remdesivir about a month ago. It has helped a lot of people get better. And I know there's other things on the way too. But whether we play sports or not, when you got to look at the Titanic when it sank, I think the captain jumped off the ship. He didn't tell the people, the patrons on the ship, Big C. Some of them stayed on and they perished. I just don't want to see anything bad happen. So all I can do is protect the people that I love and stay informed as much as I can with Big C Sports. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, like I said, when we're not talking about the youth sports, everybody's talking about the big money revenue sports right now. They're talking about the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL. They're talking about the NFL. But nobody's talking about the youth sports. And as the college football season and the NFL football season comes along, we have the high school and Pop Warner football season that comes on. Those are the ones that are really concerning me right now. There's never given any play on any of these sports talk show about the youth sports, Charlton, like they don't exist.
Yeah.
But they are the feeder system for the colleges, the universities, and the professional leagues. And so as you talk about getting those sports underway, Charlton, I'm concerned, and no one has talked about the testing of the youth leagues.
Yeah.
They just canceled Little League Baseball because they didn't have enough testing to cover all the Little League teams around the country. And we're talking about thousands of Little League Baseball teams. Any city that you go to, they all have the leagues, Charlton. You can go to a city that has one high school.
Yeah.
And that one high school will support at least 8 to 12 Little League Baseball teams, if more, Charlton, because of the clamoring that wants to get out there, and parents have always pushed their kids towards athletics. And these little kids touch each other, high-five each other, hug each other, and all that. They don't even understand what social distancing is,
no, they
especially when they're in the dugout. So if you can cancel that, how do you protect youth football when it comes to Pop Warner, the embryonic stage of developing youth and young football players? And then you graduate into this high school area where you got everybody out there, and you think about a lot of the coaches in high school, they use a lot of archaic techniques when they're teaching these kids, but they don't know how to practice social distancing. They all still use the same water bottles, Charlton, when they're taking a drink. They just pass them around from one to another. So there's no social distancing and the hard breathing on that water bottle as they're passing them around. And, everybody's going to be in social contact with each other. So those are the things that really concern me.
Yeah, it really does. So we just got to everybody has to pay attention to what keeps them safe. And hopefully that will keep a lot of people doing the right things, because not everybody knows how to pay attention to the news. That's why I love with what we do. We bring that to people's attention. I also just want to say, I know it's sad news, but it's how you live too. Former Miami Dolphins iconic football coach Don Shula, really the patriarch of NFL football coaches, passed away at age 90. and the only coach to win every game start to finish. That was the perfect season had by the 1972 Miami Dolphins. We know so many of those great, the no-name defense, Big C, but you think about guys like Larry Csonka, and they had, of course, Greasy at quarterback, and just so many wonderful players that have played for that team when they played down in the Orange Bowl, which I love where the Orange Bowl was situated. I know they built the Joe Robbie Stadium, now Hard Rock Stadium, up in Fort Lauderdale area. But the great Don Shula, one of the longtime coaches, architect of the perfect season in NFL history, it's amazing he was part of the Miami Dolphins for 50 years, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Don Shula, it's sad to hear about his passing today, Charlton. One of the most iconic figures in the history of the NFL, the winningest coach all time in the league. And at the time when Carroll Rosenbloom hired him in 1963 with the Baltimore Colts after having a 7-year career as a defensive back in the NFL, where he started out with the Baltimore Colts, he was the youngest head coach in the NFL at the age of 33, Charlton. And, but he also lost what was called the biggest upset in the history when the Colts lost to the Jets in Super Bowl III down in Miami, Charlton. And, it strained his relationship with Carroll Rosenbloom. And the following year, he became the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. He made 6 appearances in the Super Bowl. He was 2-4 in the Super Bowl with back-to-back victories, Charlton. He beat the Washington Redskins, in Los Angeles. He beat the Minnesota Vikings down in Houston, Texas. But Don Shula will always be known as a leader and a developer of men, Charlton. He's an iconic figure. You think about the guy that he surpassed in victories, George Halas, who had set the record, and 2 years prior to his retirement from the Dolphins, he surpassed George Halas as the winningest coach all time in NFL history. Most likely a record that won't be broken because Bill Belichick is some 70 victories away from that. But when you think about the people that he molded, as you talked about the perfect season, Charlton, being able to use multiple quarterbacks. This is a guy, when he lost Super Bowl III to the Jets, he used Earl Morrall as the quarterback. A few years later in 72, he had Earl Morrall that had to lead the Dolphins to 11 victories that year because Bob Greasy had broke his leg and stuff. But he knew how to get the best out of men. And when you think about the decades that he coached in the NFL, the lives that he touched, the men that he mentored, Charlton, he will be surely missed.
Surely missed. I remember when they came out to the Super Bowl and when they had it at Stanford and they lost to the 49ers. Dan Marino was a rookie. And then he had the great Bill Walsh. So we've lost some iconic people in the world of sports. You got the great Bill Walsh several years ago. And now you have Don Shula. I'll never forget that Super Bowl down at the old Stanford Stadium. He has spent several seasons in the NFL as a player for the Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Colts, Washington Redskins, served as head coach of the Colts for the most of his quarter century at the helm of the Dolphins between 1970 and 1995. You talked about the back-to-back Super Bowls in the 70s. I remember watching, compared to how, of course, you can say this across the board, but players are so much bigger and stronger now and faster. But his Miami Dolphins team, with that no-name defense, a lot of those guys were skinny. They had linebackers that were about 200 pounds, but now you can't even get on the field unless you're about 200 pounds, even if you're a safety, Big C. And we talked about that 1972 team that set the bar that no one's really going to touch. The Patriots came close, minus the New York Giants said, hold on, my friend. And the Dolphins had that 14-7 win over the Redskins down at the Coliseum in Los Angeles. But when you look at what he's done, and so many of the great history of the Miami Dolphins is tied to him. And the fact that this nouveau riche NFL, where you have the Raiders, isn't it something? They played the Raiders in the Sea of Hands at the Coliseum. I'll never forget Clarence Davis and the great Kenny the Snake Stabler. The Miami Dolphins lost that game at the Coliseum in Oakland. The crowd was going crazy. But the Raiders, since that game in the Sea of Hands, they've moved to Los Angeles. They moved back to Oakland. And now they've moved to Las Vegas. All while the time Don Shula and the Dolphins have been in South Florida, even though they moved from the Orange Bowl site to Fort Lauderdale. But he's seen a lot of things change, Big C. So who would be the next Don Shula, if that makes any sense, to be at the helm for an organization for about 50 years? Big C, your thoughts?
No one's going to spend that time. Bill Belichick is the longest tenured coach right now that we see, with the Patriots. But, what Don Shula did in an era You have to understand Don Shula came along pre-free agency, Charlton, so it allowed players and coaches to be in the same organization. Players didn't have the freedom of movement that they have now, and that dictates how long that a coach can be around, salary caps and free agency. So to expect a coach to be around 20 years in an organization other than Bill Belichick, you're not going to get that anymore.
You know, you were talking to me last week about there's some talk in the South Florida, some Miami area newspapers and media. They were thinking, should they take out Dan Marino's jersey out of retirement because they want to make Tua feel comfortable wearing the same number 13 that the great Dan Marino wore. And I said no. Well, definitely with the passing of Don Shula, no. I just think some things that you can't replace, and so may he rest in peace and all the people that are affected by him. It's the life that he lived, and 90 years is a good life, but I really just want to say thoughts and prayers with his family. And as the world goes forward, Big C, and we talk about baseball, I know, and I was saying this, that Major League Baseball will follow what they're doing in Korea, because in South Korea, and this just came to the forebearance about maybe 2 weeks ago, South Korea was talking about televising baseball, and they're doing that. So now the mothership is going to televise South Korea's baseball organization during the upcoming 2020 season, starting with the league's opening day on Tuesday. So they're going to broadcast the mothership from across the oceans to the American TV stations, but they're not going to watch USA Major League Baseball open up. We don't know yet. I mean, they may be delayed. Who knows? The way everybody's pushing forward, irrespective of what science is saying, we don't know if they're going to start baseball sometime this summer. But give me your thoughts on going to South Korea to televise baseball in front of empty stadiums. It's a good and bad thing, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you can get a feed anywhere from around the world. Everything's done over the internet. Charlton, now they're not going to go over there. They can broadcast it from the studio, but you're talking about an empty stadium with players on the field. It would be a different feel. It's going to look like practice, Charlton. It's not going to be real, but also that game's going to be broadcast at 1:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you better have the coffee pot on.
Have the coffee pot on, just like the NBA Finals are broadcast at midnight back in the day before it got started. So anyway, we'll have some baseball. It will just be South Korean style, but it's all fair and love and war. The NFL, also Big C, they call off the international games this year due to COVID-19. They've called off the annual International Series games in London and also Mexico City amid the pandemic. I think it's good. Everybody's in wait mode, and as leagues are deciding, the only reason they're calling off games is because of science. That's the only reason. I know you talked about Major League Baseball, and in the Little League Baseball World Series has been canceled for the first time since World War II, and they're still pushing for other sports. But if you look at South Korea, I'm not going to say we care about people more here than there. The virus is a worldwide virus, but the NFL makes a big statement by canceling going international with their games. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, it's not that they're making a big statement, Charlton. The NFL has not even put out their schedule yet. And so those teams that would be the home team on that road game, it will just be another home game they'll bring back to their facility. I mean, the NFL hasn't slated when or where they're going to start. So saying that they're going to have these international games and you don't know if the season's going to kick off in September, I mean, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it was the right thing to do. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they were actually slated to play 2 home games in London. What a slap on the face to the Jacksonville fans. They're going to have 2 home games in London, had everything gone according to plan. And then also they were going to play at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with the Atlanta Falcons and the Miami Dolphins. And the NFL was also scheduled to play a game at Azteca Stadium in Mexico City with the Arizona Cardinals as a home team. But that's just one game. I could understand. But if you're going to expand, you got to expand with somebody. But missing those, that's the way the NFL has grown its prosperity around the world and grown its benchmark around the world. And for Arizona, you know, that's right in the backyard. Mexico City, not that far from Arizona. But it's one thing that the NFL is doing just to make sure that they don't push forward the way South Korea is doing. So in your opinion, what's the difference between South Korea playing and then NFL football deciding not to play? Is it just an experiment? We're waiting to see what happens. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, the NFL has been put on hold, Charlton, for, some time.
Yeah.
And so you saw that with the draft. They didn't hold the draft in Las Vegas. They did a virtual draft.
Yeah.
With the baseball being played in South Korea, you look at the number of cases that they've had in South Korea. I think they've had 13 for every 10,000, people that they've tested over there. There's 60 million people in the country.
Yeah.
They have one of the lowest rates in the world as far as corona. So, they're going to test everybody fever-wise when they come into the stadium. They're going to check body temperature during the game to see where players are. There's no high-fiving. There's no contact between the players. I'm just, it's just countries are doing what they want to do.
Yeah.
And here in the U.S., where we're leading the world in cases and loss of life, Charlton, you have to take every precaution.
You got to take every precaution. And so I just wish everybody well. Want to make sure I pay attention to science. I want to ask you, because talking about football, this thing that happened over the weekend, and I want to juxtapose it to the Green Bay Packers picking up Jordan Love out of Utah State and making him there to learn from Aaron Rodgers. A lot of people didn't like that. They don't feel that Aaron Rodgers should have to play team football, that he should be more like a tennis player. You're on your own. Or maybe golf, you have a caddy. But, football is a team sport. But the Dallas Cowboys, they bring on, with Dak Prescott contracts and talks, they bring on Andy Dalton as they brace for the AFC North, the non-conference game. They open up the first two games of the season. They're going to play actually Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, of course. But Andy Dalton, I think, is a smart choice as a backup to Prescott, just because getting off to the first two games in the season, you're going to want to have somebody who understands what you might be facing. I don't see it as a challenge to Dak Prescott, but no people feel that it's an insult to Dak Prescott the way they felt as an insult to Aaron Rodgers. What's the difference, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, I don't look at any team signing a backup quarterback as an insult, because you want to make sure you had depth. When you look at Mike McCarthy, who was a new coach, he looked at the backup quarterback situation in Dallas and said, this is not a situation I want to go into the season with. Andy Dalton was available. They scooped him up after he cleared waivers. They got him for a discount $3 million. But what I look at more than just the Dallas Cowboys signing Andy Dalton, I look at black quarterbacks can't get signed in a backup role in the NFL. If you look at the week before, Jameis Winston signs with the New Orleans Saints. Here's a guy who threw for 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns the previous season. He had to settle for a $1 million contract.
Yeah.
Andy Dalton threw for less than 3,000 yards. He had to sit out 3 games because they put in his backup to see what the backup can do.
Yeah.
And he goes to Dallas and gets $3 million.
Yeah.
I look at that around the NFL. When you look at the table and see how many African-American quarterbacks are backup quarterbacks in the NFL, that's the appalling thing to me, is that if you're not a starter, you're gone as a black quarterback. If you're average as a black quarterback, then you're going to lose your job. If you're average as a white quarterback, then you're going to get a high salary and be a backup. You're going to sit on the bench. You're going to hold a clipboard, and you can make anywhere between $3 and $5 million a year. I look at Matt Schaub, who's a backup quarterback down in Atlanta. Matt Schaub, had 2 decent years in Houston over a decade ago. In the last couple of years, he's been in Atlanta the last 3 or 4 years as a backup to Matt Ryan, making somewhere between $3 and $5 million a year holding a clipboard.
Yeah.
African-American quarterbacks who are more athletic and talented and younger can't get those positions in the NFL. When we look at where they are, Teddy Bridgewater, he sit for a year there in New Orleans. He got a job with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but by him getting a job with another team, Carolina Panthers, another black quarterback had to lose his job in Cam Newton.
Yeah.
Teams are not inclined to sign black quarterbacks to be a backup. The NFL right now is reminding me a lot of Major League Baseball. When you look on a bench in Major League Baseball, there's 25 guys or so in Major League Baseball on the bench.
Yeah.
The last 4 or 5 guys who are not in the lineup on a regular basis are never African American. They're always white players, Charlton, because when you're sitting in the meeting room, that coach wants somebody who he can identify with, just like when we look at not having black coaches in the league.
Yeah.
That owners want somebody they can identify with, who talks the same language that they talk, that they grew up in. And so this is what appalls me more than them signing Andy Dalton, is why more black quarterbacks just don't get signed. And there was an article with Alex Smith. I watched Project 11, a tremendous story about Alex Smith and his broken leg.
Yep.
But he came out and said he doesn't understand why the guy that beat him out, Colin Kaepernick, is not in the NFL, when people are saying, well, he doesn't act like he wants to play. I don't see these white backup quarterbacks in the NFL acting like they want to play. I see them going to the window picking up that paycheck on Monday, but they never act like they want to play. They don't push the white starting quarterback out of his position.
You know, before we come up on the Big C pause, and even Congress is talking about pausing, the thing with Colin Kaepernick stood up for people of color, and it offended a lot of people. There's a well-known quarterback that plays in the NFL. I'm not going to say his name, but people can Google it, that was accused of sexual assault twice, and it never cost him. But he's white. We'll take the Big C pause, known as the Big C timeout. We'll be back in just a moment. Is COVID-19 more important than being healthy? We'll be back in just a moment. All right, we are back from what's called the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Speaker.com. There's 2 apps that I love called Google and Alexa. Just say Google. Or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic from 3,000 miles away, and he will do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Really appreciate the way things are going. Also very happy to be affiliated with Valley Homes Weekly TV on Dish TV, DirecTV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants. Can't wait until baseball's back, at least in the United States. Just tell them Big C Central. The goal simple: recruit 100 real estate brokers. Put your property listings on TV just like McDonald's. Car dealerships do it. And sports teams too. Watch TV work for you. 800-772-8624. 800-772-8624. Big C, in coming back, I know you mentioned that thing about African-American quarterbacks not getting the same opportunity, and we know that. I mean, we just know it because this is what I want to get into. This thing that happened with the Jordan thing, they did a story on Michael Jordan. I only watched about an hour of it over the last 2 weeks because I'd seen it before. But what I do think is absent, that maybe mainstream takes our attention off of, and it's just my opinion. Nobody has a right to tell someone how to feel. I think when you look at Michael Jordan, and people look at Mike, they want to be like Mike as an athlete. But Michael Jordan, he's part owner of the Charlotte Hornets. He believes that social activism is part of an NBA's platform, and he believes that players should practice social activism, whether Steph Curry or LeBron James or many others like his former teammate Steve Kerr. They're not Ali, but they're all trying to be something. But society spends a lot of time on Michael Jordan as a basketball player, to dribble, to shoot, to dunk, run up and down the court. But what I think is really missing is there's not as much talk about the ownership that he's been able to pull off as one of the rare African-American athletes that's been allowed into that society, that cronyism, and that society where they say you can't get in no matter how good you've been. But he's been able to pull that off. And I think that makes more sense for people to pay attention to than how many times he could dunk a basketball or shoot a basket. Does that make any sense, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, you're not going to focus on that, Charlton, because if you focus on that beyond the athleticism that Michael Jordan possessed, then you're saying that blacks are equal in society and in business. And that's not what the media wants to talk about, whether it's a sports station or mainstream sports television station. They only want to talk about the athleticism of what transpired some 30 years ago. They're not talking about the advancement of where he is now as a grown man instead of just being an athlete. You can be a competitor on the sport. You can be, during the sport, and you can be a competitor in the business world.
Yeah.
And they don't want to talk about blacks being competitors in the business world because it lets you know in mainstream society that blacks can't succeed. And this is not the story that you want to tell. So instead of 30 years later talking about a success as an owner of an organization, you want to talk about a success as a player some 30 years after his playing days are over. And that's where we get stumped also in black society, is that's what we want to gravitas to. Everybody, and I haven't seen 1 minute of the special other than when they have a commercial on.
Yeah.
But everybody wants to gravitas back to where it was 30 years ago. Just talk about the athlete. Don't talk about the successful businessman. Talk about the competitive athlete. And that's where we lose the message at. You know, it's like, you know, they wanted to play a part where they were talking about him and the shoes and Republicans and him not being a social activist. You have to understand, Muhammad Ali wasn't a social activist. A lot of people want to label him that he was a social activist. He was a guy who did not want to go to Vietnam and fight. And so that's what he was an activist against, because we don't see white society saying, okay, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, they have to be social activists against things that are going wrong. But when something is out there, they say athletes have to go out, and especially a black athlete, and be a social activist and be a social leader against this. And that's the thing that Michael fought against. Michael said, I'm here to play basketball. And a lot of people knocked him about that and said, well, you don't have the social conscious Ali. Ali didn't go out and protest. People lost the message that Ali was about.
Yeah.
Ali did the same thing that a lot of young white kids did. I am not going to Vietnam. They went to Canada and other places. He stayed here in the country and fought it in the public eye, saying that the war was wrong.
Yeah.
But because he was a Muslim, everybody was saying that he was a social activist and going against the country. No, he was going against the war. He got labeled as something bigger, but you never saw him leading marches up and down the street in the buildings or facilities. He fought against a war, saying that it was wrong, and he got labeled as a social activist.
Yeah, and I think that's incredible. POTUS also got 5 deferments because he had shin splints and he was in college. That's the white privilege. Ali was the one jumping up and down on his shin. You would think he would have shin splints, Big C, but he did it for socially conscious reasons, and he paid a big price for it. So I don't like to live in the past, but when I was looking at some things about what Michael Jordan has accomplished, I think Jordan, I respect him more for being able to crack that oligarchy, that ownership that a lot of men of color have not been able to crack, even though they've made these leagues worth billions of dollars and have not been let in. But he's been able to get in. And to me, I liked following that story more so than, hey, he's going to put on a media campaign about what he did 30 years ago. And one more thing I'll touch on before I get into that too. It takes the mind off of what people need to do now. Again, everybody has their own opinion. We're not a monolithic group. But I think if that story were done on Michael Jordan, and they're going to do it for a couple of weeks, it makes more sense, especially in this economy where we have over 30 million people that have filed for unemployment or been laid off or furloughed. It would make more sense to follow how do you take what you have and take lemons and make lemonade, not go back and how to sell more tennis shoes. But that message would benefit black Americans more. So they want to keep people spoon-fed on, can you go out and shoot a basketball for 2 hours a day or 3 hours, as opposed to learning business trades for 2 or 3 hours. Big C, your thoughts?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, this special that they're running on television, they're not forcing blacks to watch it. It's almost like a family thing that blacks are forcing each other to watch it. I mean, when you look around at all the youth basketball camps, you see more black kids out there in those youth basketball camps. It's almost like they can't do the math, trying to understand that how many of them are going to be able to get into college and how many of them are going to get into the NBA. The NBA they have 15 players per team, and yet each one of these youth basketball programs got 15 players per team out there.
Yeah.
And then you go to high school, you go to college. Somebody needs to understand and talk about education. I mean, if you focus on where Michael Jordan is now versus where he was then, I mean, that comes down to parental mentorship. I mean, as a parent, they say, okay, the kids are sitting at home at night watching these series, but they're not sitting up with the parents going over school lessons, doing, you know, college prep or anything like that. So I find that as a fault within the parents, that they're not directing their children to where Michael is now instead of going back to where Michael was 30 years ago.
Well, that's a blanket statement. I agree and disagree, because everybody, even yourself, you play at youth sports. You don't just go to play professional football because you walk out of the door and do it. You got to start somewhere, whether it's high school football or AAU. It doesn't mean that they're linear. It just means that it's also a way to build morale and team building and learn how to go through things.
But see, at a time when I grew up and played youth sports, we didn't have a remote control. There was no DVR. There was no cable television. We played sports as a social function when I was growing up. It was about teaching camaraderie. It was about teaching you how to socialize with others. There's so many different socializing steps now. And it wasn't as many teams, even in the professional leagues when I was a kid growing up, as there are now in baseball, basketball, football, hockey.
Yeah.
It wasn't as many teams. But what I'm saying now is that because there's so many distractions in society, it becomes a parental thing on how they direct their children to be. I mean, if my parents had had the education that I have at their age, I would have had a much different lifestyle. I don't even know if I would have played sports. Or if I did, I would have went at it differently.
Yeah.
But I did it as an outlet because when you're poor, you're trying to find some outlet. Now parents are going out spending $200-300 for a pair of damn sneakers for the kid to play.
Yeah.
That's lack of parental guidance. We played in Chuck Taylor's and spot-built, football shoes. That's what Rydell football shoes. That's what we played in because those are the only brands out there. Kids now, I can't play unless I got a $300 Jordans on my feet.
Yeah, and that may be an individual. Some people shop in Beverly Hills or Buckhead. Others shop at JCPenney's or Sears. But everybody still, I don't know anyone that just woke up and played pro sports. They have to play at some level, whether it's high school, college. And that's just the opportunity. It builds so many more things than playing pro. But there are a lot of athletes that went on to accomplish ownership in teams or even part ownership in teams, Big C, from LeBron James to Shaquille O'Neal. There's guys like the great, Wayne Gretzky. He's done it. Of course, Michael Jordan has. They've had either ownership or part ownership in professional teams. Serena Williams doing her thing on the women's side. David Beckham. There's a lot of players. Magic Johnson, part owner of the L.A. Dodgers. Oscar De La Hoya. These guys, they've had the chance to take whatever they grew and made their wealth in, and they were able to get back in on the ownership side from Yao Ming. I mean, there's been so many players, and I would love to see that. Nolan Ryan down there in Texas. So there's a lot of people. Venus Williams as well. They've taken what they learned. Look at John Elway. He was co-owner of the Colorado Crush Arena Football League, and now he's GM with the Denver Broncos. Mario Lemieux with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, everybody has a place where they started, and so work done. He's a part owner in the Atlanta Falcons, one of the greatest players to ever come out of Florida State. So they use sports as a springboard, not as a be-all. So I think it helps people with building character, but it also, Big C, what Michael Jordan knows, and guys like Magic Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James, Steph Curry, it opens doors to be able to get to that bracket and not just focus on sports. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, there's always been black owners in professional sports, going back to the early days of the NFL. Fritz Pollard was a co-owner in the team, Charlton, the first black player to play in the early days of the NFL.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's nothing new. But what I'm saying in totality, as we look at young players today, think about how many young players who thought they were going to get there and don't get there. They didn't get this college scholarship.
Yeah.
And things of that nature. Or they couldn't do the grades in school, and they don't get drafted. They don't get signed as a free agent. This is what I'm talking about, is that the parents don't prepare them for the pitfalls. They don't do the math. They say, okay, look, you go to a youth league, Charlton, even a league in high school. Look how many teams are in a league. You got 10, 12 teams in a league in high school.
Yeah.
And yet there's only one college that they can go to. All of those players, when you look at the 15 players that are on the roster and there's 10 teams in the league, that's 150 players. And yet one college only has 15 players on the roster. This is what I'm talking about, prep for the youth. Prep them for life.
Yeah.
I understand ownership is a great thing to be a part of. I've owned a few different businesses in my life. It was a great thing to go out and start something from the embryonic stage up. But like I said, if I'd have had the backing that I had educationally from my parents in those days, who knows where I would have gotten to at those points, but it wasn't there. And so what I'm saying now is because you have an opportunity in this internet highway where you'd have access to everything.
Yeah.
You have, opportunities that are way beyond what I saw 50 years ago when I was growing up, to have an opportunity to advance yourself in life, to even understand that sports is a short business, that
Yeah.
it's only a year or two on average involvement in it, and where you can do otherwise in life if you prepare yourself for it, is that we get stuck on this hamster wheel that keeps going around and around and doesn't move. Is that we only have a sports cycle as minorities, and we keep looking at that, thinking that that's the end all to be all. But that one play can have that injury to end your career. Then where do you go from there?
Yeah.
What do you fall back on?
Yeah, that's true too. But I'm still a big proponent of the sports league. I played Little League baseball. I played punt, pass, and kick. But I still have the grades too. So I don't want to just indict every parent as saying that they don't teach their kids. There's a lot of people that do both, and I still think it's an avenue that keeps a lot of kids on the right path. Without that, sometimes people fall through the cracks. But in the final 10 minutes, Big C, I want to jump to the world of Major League Baseball and the National Hockey League and also the NBA. We talked about baseball in South Korea. You also look at Canadian Football League. They're all loaded with international players, but I believe if you look at the NHL, they've been brainstorming scenarios in which the league would be able to resume in the 2020 season. However, another hurdle could involve players who are non-Canadian residents crossing the border. You have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He believes that the NHL will need to follow quarantine protocols if players come into Canada. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you have to look at that in all those leagues that supported by international players. And when you have that 14-day quarantine, at what point can you bring the players into the country? You talked about the Canadian Football League. You talked about the NHL that plays in both the U.S. and in Canada. We got the NBA with the team in Toronto, and we know most of those are American players, and even some players on the team from Africa and other countries, Charlton, that have to come back in. Even the NBA in total, when you look at teams here in the U.S., those teams have to have visas. They have to be able to get back into the U.S. and back into Canada.
Yeah.
We've seen the crackdown on international travel where there's been banned from certain countries that you can't fly in and out of the U.S. and Canada also, Charlton. So what are those leagues going to do to get around that? Even the NFL has some international players in the NFL that are from some other countries in the world. So and mainly when we're sitting here talking about baseball and getting baseball started as they're doing in South Korea. Look at the number of international players that are in Major League Baseball that have to have those work visas to come into this country that the president called a lot of them S-hole countries. How do they get back in? How do they go through their quarantine? As well as the NHL and NBA, is they're all talking about having a finish to the season and a playoff. What are they going to do to get those players back?
That's a very good question, and I'm sure they'll figure it out. But if you have to have players that are quarantined for 14 days crossing international lines and into different countries, I don't know if they'll figure it out. Basically, there's a lot of money on the line that will help them figure it out. When you think about figuring it out, and you talked about quarterbacks earlier, and again, thoughts and prayers with the Don Shula's family. 90 years is a good life, but I still thoughts and prayers with his family. You think about quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs, is the 36th highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and Deshaun Watson of the Houston Texans right behind him. These two players met in the playoffs this past season, but that's pretty low on the list of being highest paid. There's only 32 teams. How you be the highest paid is 36? Are you the MVP's 36th highest paid? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, that means there's some backup quarterbacks that make a lot more money than Patrick Mahomes. We just saw Andy Dalton just signed in Dallas, getting $3 million a year. Think about Marcus Mariota, who just signed with the Raiders a few weeks ago, Charlton, and he got $17 million, $7 million guaranteed for signing as a backup for Derek Carr. And this is one of the things that I've talked about with black quarterbacks in the NFL, that you're not willing to pay those black quarterbacks to sit on the bench, hold a clipboard, and pay them several $1 million a year. We saw the exception with Teddy Bridgewater last year in New Orleans, but Jameis Winston was only able to get $1 million for doing the same job. And think about this. Marcus Mariota got benched last year about 5 games into the season. And he got a $17 million contract from the Raiders. Jameis Winston led the league in passing yards and second and touchdowns. He was only able to get $1 million from the New Orleans Saints. Andy Dalton gets $3 million, possibly $7 million with incentives from the Dallas Cowboys. He was benched for 3 games. And yet you have the league MVP, Super Bowl MVP, and you have the guy that's nipping at his heel in Deshaun Watson, and neither one of these guys can make the type of money that those guys that got benched made.
Isn't that amazing? It's all fair, love, and war. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. The apps that I really love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic from 3,000 miles away. I think even Congress is doing what Big C Sports is doing. Congress is now doing their show from miles and miles away. Big C is all fair and level war. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Really appreciate that. Also, the affiliation with Valley Homes Weekly TV on Dish TV, Direct TV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants. Just tell them Big C Central. The goal is simple: recruit 100 real estate brokers, put their property listings on TV, and let TV work for you. Just like McDonald's, just like car dealerships, and real estate, it can work for you. 800-772-8624. That's 800-772-8624. Big C, in the final few minutes, you know, when I think about players and athletes all over the country in different sports, still sticking with the NFL, ranking the top 10 undrafted quarterbacks in the final 5 minutes in NFL history. Mike Tomczak, Chicago Bears from Ohio State. There was Eric Kramer from the Detroit Lions out of North Carolina State. I remember the great John Kitna, the Seattle Seahawks out of Central Washington. There was John Hart, St. Louis Cardinals, Southern Illinois, and Jake Delhomme, Carolina Panthers, Southwestern Louisiana. There's also your friend Tony Romo, Dallas Cowboys, Eastern Illinois, Jeff Garcia, the San Francisco 49ers, San Jose State. Number 3, it was Dave Craig, Seattle Seahawks out of Milton College. Number 2, Kurt Warner, LA Rams out of Northern Iowa. And then one of the most disrespected quarterbacks in the history of the universe. I believe he has 5 CFL championships, the great Warren Moon, Houston Oilers, out of the University of Washington Huskies. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, as everyone is always talking about a franchise quarterback, Charlton, that you got to spend a first-round draft pick on a quarterback, and we've seen some of the vitriol and fight back from the media about a couple of African-American quarterbacks being drafted high in this past draft, Jordan Love to the Packers and Jalen Hurts to the Eagles. You know, you can go out there and find a diamond in the rough anywhere. So it doesn't matter whether it's the African-American quarterback that you draft high or the white quarterback that you find somewhere in free agency. Seattle did it twice with Kitna and the other kid. So, you know, it's just about being in the right place at the right time. And you talked about all those quarterbacks that made a difference. Jake Delhomme made it all the way to the Super Bowl, he and Kurt Warner. So when you think about having a franchise quarterback that wants to lead to success, it doesn't have to be in the first round. They're out there in free agency also.
Yeah, it's out there. The opportunity is there. I know everybody's trying to get ready for Mother's Day weekend. Should be a fabulous Mother's Day weekend. And I know the states are opening, Big C. Still got to practice social distancing if possible. But if anybody could have seen what went on around the nation's capital, it's just ironic. The nation's capital had a flyover for the first responders, Big C, so they can show respect for them. And then as people were surrounding the Washington Monument in the malls in Washington and all over the country, Congress is doing teleconferencing. As we have states opening up, they're not opening up, they're doing teleconferences. Big C, your thoughts on the last minute?
Well, I mean, these are intelligent people that are understanding the science. And not only that, you got to look at their age. All of these people are in that, you know, that category where, you know, that they have problems, Charlton. So they want to make sure that they listen to the science. And that's what gets me more than anything else. Understand the science. If you're old enough to understand the science, why are you trying to force everybody else back out there in harm's way?
Yep, because sometimes mice don't listen, Big C. They just don't listen. And sometimes there's a book called Who Moved My Cheese that I think everybody should read, and it makes a lot of sense. Big C, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young man, rumble. Big C, what are you looking forward to in the sports universe?
Well, I'm looking forward to going out and putting on that coffee pot tonight, Charlton, and setting an alarm so I can get up and watch some 1:30 a.m. in the morning baseball. But I also want to give my respects and thanks to all the frontline healthcare workers and first responders. Much appreciation for what all you do for everybody in this country.
They do for everybody in this country, and you can do it too. Everybody stay safe and wash your hands and just practice social distancing. You can find out more following Big C Sports every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide when you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. As we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports Show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.